The rain drummed against the Georgian windows of the Blackwood mansion in London's affluent Hampstead Heath, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the manicured gardens beyond. Marcus Chen adjusted his navy blazer as he stepped out of the black cab, the cool October evening air carrying the scent of wet leaves and expensive perfume from the party already in progress inside. It had been 6 months since he'd last seen Victoria Blackwood, and the invitation to her engagement party had arrived with all the formality their complicated history demanded. Thick cream paper, gold embossing, his name written in her distinctive handwriting, the same hand that had once written love letters, then goodbye notes, then legal documents. Mr. Chen, the uniformed doorman's voice cut through his reverie. Miss Blackwood is expecting you. Marcus nodded, straightening his shoulders. At 34, he had built a successful architectural firm from nothing, designing buildings that would outlast the pain of their relationship. But standing here now, he felt like that 25-year-old graduate student again, head over heels for the girl who would ultimately choose security over love. The foyer was exactly as he remembered, marble floors that echoed every footstep, crystal chandelier casting dancing shadows on walls lined with portraits of dead Blackwoods, and the overwhelming scent of white lilies that Victoria had always favored. The sound of conversation and clinking glasses drifted from the main drawing room, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter that sounded forced, performative. Before we get into the video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell me in the comments which city or country you're watching from. Marcus! Victoria's voice carried that same musical quality that had first captivated him at university. She appeared at the top of the grand staircase, descending with the practiced grace of someone born to wealth. Her emerald dress complemented her auburn hair, now styled in an elegant updo that spoke of expensive salons and careful preparation. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Green as sea glass, they held a flicker of something he couldn't quite place. Nervousness, fear, or was it simply the awkwardness of seeing an ex-lover at her engagement party? "You came," she said, reaching the bottom of the stairs and extending her hand. Her engagement ring caught the light, a diamond so large it seemed vulgar, nothing like the simple band he'd once imagined placing on her finger. "I said I would." His voice was steady, professional. Years of client meetings had taught him to mask his emotions behind a veneer of polite interest. "Richard will be so pleased to meet you. He's heard so much about your work." She paused, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "About you." Before Marcus could respond, a man emerged from the drawing room, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident bearing that came from generational wealth and unquestioned privilege. Richard Ashworth III, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, moved through the world as if it had been designed specifically for his comfort. The famous Marcus Chen. Richard's handshake was firm, perhaps a touch too firm. "Victoria's told me you're the architect behind those stunning residential towers in Canary Wharf. Brilliant work." "Thank you." Marcus studied the man who had won Victoria's hand. Richard was handsome in that particular way of the British upper class, all sharp angles and expensive grooming, with eyes that appraised everything as a potential acquisition. "Come, you must meet Mother," Richard continued, placing a possessive hand on Victoria's lower back. "She's been dying to meet the man who designed the Pemberton estate." They moved into the drawing room, where London's elite mingled beneath oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. The conversation was the usual mixture of politics, property values, and thinly veiled gossip that passed for wit in these circles. Marcus accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, noting how the crystal felt substantial in his hand. Everything in this world was built to last, to impress, to remind you of your place in the hierarchy. Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth held court near the fireplace, a woman in her 70s whose steel-grey hair was set in perfect waves and whose jewelry could fund a small country's education system. She watched Marcus approach with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. "Mother, "This is Marcus Chen," Richard announced with the pride of presenting a prized specimen. "Ah, the architect." Eleanor's voice carried the crisp authority of someone who had never been contradicted. "Richard speaks very highly of your work. Tell me, what draws a young man to designing homes for others rather than building one for himself?" The question landed like a blade wrapped in silk. Marcus felt Victoria stiffen beside him, heard the subtle intake of breath that meant she understood the subtext perfectly. This wasn't small talk, it was reconnaissance. "I find there's something honest about creating spaces where people can be truly themselves," Marcus replied carefully. "The challenge is designing something that will serve them not just today, but as they grow and change." How philosophical. Eleanor's smile never reached her eyes, though I suppose some people never do. "Settle down. Always building, always moving, never quite committing." The word hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigarette. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in their immediate circle, saw Victoria's face flush slightly pink. This was theatre, he realized. He was being displayed as the road not taken, the cautionary tale that made Richard's proposal all the more attractive. "Marcus builds beautiful things," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying a note of defiance that surprised everyone, including herself. "He always has." Eleanor's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Of course, dear. Though beauty without permanence is rather fleeting, don't you think?" The server appeared again, offering fresh glasses of champagne. Marcus reached for one, his fingers closing around the crystal stem, and froze. The glass was warm, not room temperature warm, but body temperature warm, as if someone had been holding it, rolling it between their palms. He looked up to find the server, a young woman with nervous eyes and trembling hands, already moving away quickly through the crowd. Marcus stared at the champagne, watching the bubbles rise in perfect columns toward the surface. In his peripheral vision, he saw Eleanor Ashworth watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Victoria was looking at the glass too, her face pale, her hand pressed unconsciously to her throat. "Everything all right?" Richard's voice carried a note of forced joviality. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus set the glass down on the nearest table without taking a sip, just admiring the crystal. "Waterford? Baccarat," Eleanor corrected smoothly. "A wedding gift from my late husband's business partner. Beautiful pieces, though they do require careful handling." The emphasis on those last words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He glanced at Victoria, saw her own untouched glass trembling slightly in her hand. Their eyes met across the small circle of conversation, and in that moment, he saw not the confident socialite or the dutiful daughter, but the girl he'd fallen in love with a decade ago, frightened, trapped, and desperately trying to communicate something she couldn't say aloud. "I think I need some air," Marcus announced suddenly. "The heat in here is rather overwhelming." "Of course," Richard said, though his tone suggested anything but understanding. "The terrace doors are just through the library. Victoria, perhaps you could show our guest the way?" It wasn't a request, and they all knew it. Victoria nodded, setting her own glass down with visible relief. As they moved away from the group, Marcus caught Eleanor Ashworth's reflection in one of the gilt-framed mirrors. She was watching them leave with the expression of a chess player who had just moved her queen into position. The library was a sanctuary of leather-bound books and heavy oak furniture, blessedly empty of other guests. Victoria closed the door behind them and leaned against it, her composure finally cracking. "You noticed," she said, and it wasn't a question. The glass was warm. Someone had been handling it. Marcus studied her face in the lamplight. "Victoria, what's going on?" She moved to the French doors that led to the terrace, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before I broke up with you?" The question caught him off guard. That night was seared into his memory, their last real conversation before everything fell apart. "I said I'd rather have one honest moment with you than a lifetime of beautiful lies. And I said you were naive, that sometimes lies are what keep us safe." She turned to face him, and he saw tears threatening to spill from her green eyes. "I was wrong, Marcus. The lies aren't keeping me safe anymore." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the lights flickered momentarily. In that brief darkness, Marcus saw something in Victoria's face that made his blood run cold. Terror so profound it had carved itself into her features like a permanent scar. "Victoria, you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me?" Before she could answer, the library door opened and Richard appeared with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. His smile was perfect, his manner unchanged, but Marcus noticed how his eyes immediately went to Victoria's position by the window, cataloguing her distance from Marcus, her body language, the tear tracks on her cheeks. "I thought you might want to toast privately before we rejoin the party," Richard said, offering them each a glass. "After all, old friends should celebrate new beginnings." Marcus looked at the champagne, then at Victoria, then at Richard's expectant face. The glass felt normal this time, cool, crystal, proper temperature, but Victoria's hands were shaking so violently now that she had to set her glass down on the library table. "I'm not feeling well," she whispered. "Perhaps I should lie down." "Nonsense," Richard replied, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Mother is about to make the toast. You wouldn't want to disappoint her." It wasn't a suggestion, and the threat beneath the words was clear as crystal. Marcus felt something shift in the room, like the air pressure change before a storm. He was missing something crucial, some piece of information that would make sense of Victoria's fear and Eleanor's calculating stares and Richard's perfect, dangerous smile. "Of course," Victoria said, picking up her glass again. Her knuckles were white where they gripped the stem. "We shouldn't keep Mother waiting." They returned to the drawing room, where Eleanor Ashworth stood ready to address the assembled guests. The conversation died away as she raised her glass, the crystal catching the chandelier light like a prism. "My dear friends," Eleanor began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the engagement of my beloved son Richard to the lovely Victoria, but the joining of 2 families with a shared understanding of what it means to preserve tradition, to honor legacy, and to ensure that those we love are properly cared for." Marcus felt Victoria tense beside him. Around them, the guests raised their glasses in preparation for the toast, the crystal singing softly as glass touched glass. "To Richard and Victoria," Eleanor continued, her eyes finding Marcus in the crowd, "may their union be blessed with longevity, prosperity, and the wisdom to know that some bonds once formed are never broken." The guests echoed the toast, and champagne was consumed all around them. Marcus watched Victoria raise her glass toward her lips, saw her hand trembling, saw the resignation in her eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. "Wait," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the congratulatory murmur. Every eye in the room turned to him, but he kept his gaze fixed on Eleanor Ashworth's face. "Before we drink, I'd like to propose a toast of my own." The silence was deafening. Richard's face had gone rigid, and Victoria's eyes were wide with something between hope and terror. Eleanor's smile remained perfectly in place, but Marcus saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly around her glass. "To honesty," Marcus said, raising his untouched champagne, "to the courage to speak truth, even when it's dangerous, and to the people who love us enough to protect us from harm, whatever form that harm might take." He met Eleanor's gaze directly, letting her see that he understood something, even if he didn't yet know exactly what. Her eyes narrowed fractionally, and for just a moment, the mask of gracious hostess slipped entirely. "How touching," she said finally, "though perhaps a bit dramatic for an engagement party." "I find the most important moments in life tend to be dramatic," Marcus replied. "They demand our full attention." Around them, the guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing undercurrents they couldn't identify. The tension was thick enough to cut, and Marcus could hear Victoria's rapid breathing beside him. "Well then," Eleanor said, her voice like silk over steel, "let us drink to honesty." She raised her glass to her lips and paused as Victoria suddenly stepped forward. "Actually," Victoria said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening, "I'd like to make one small change to the toast." Every eye in the room fixed on her. Richard's face was a mask of forced calm, but Marcus could see the warning in his eyes, the subtle shake of his head that said she was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Victoria reached for Eleanor's glass with steady hands. "In my family, we have a tradition. The elder woman always drinks first, to bless the union." She looked directly at her future mother-in-law. "Would you honor me, Mrs. Ashworth, by taking the first sip from my glass instead?" The question hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Eleanor's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, calculation, something that might have been fear, and finally, cold fury. "How quaint," she said after a moment that felt like an eternity. "Though I'm quite fond of my own champagne, thank you." "Please," Victoria insisted, and now her voice carried a note of steel that Marcus had never heard before. "I insist. It would mean so much to me." The standoff stretched between them, two women locked in a battle of wills that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with survival. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he began to understand what Victoria was really asking and what Eleanor's refusal meant. Finally, Eleanor smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that never touched her eyes. "Perhaps we should simply drink from our own glasses," she suggested. "After all, we each know exactly what we're getting that way." The threat was so clear, so brazenly delivered, that Marcus felt his breath catch. Around them, the other guests continued their oblivious chatter, but in their small circle, everything had changed. The game was out in the open now, no more pretense, no more polite social theater. Victoria's hand found Marcus's arm, her grip tight enough to bruise. He could feel her pulse racing beneath his fingertips, could see the perspiration beading on her forehead despite the cool evening air. "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that Victoria makes an excellent point about honoring traditions. Mrs. Ashworth, surely you wouldn't deny a bride's simple request." Eleanor's eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. "Mr. Chen, I'm beginning to suspect you don't understand the complexities of the situation." "I understand enough," he replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I understand that Victoria is asking you to do something that should be simple courtesy, and you're refusing. I understand that your refusal is causing her distress, and I understand that sometimes the things we're most afraid to do are exactly the things we most need to do." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Eleanor stood frozen, her glass still raised, her face a study in barely controlled rage. "Very well," she said finally, her voice like winter wind. "If it means so much to you, my dear." She reached for Victoria's glass, and at the last moment, Richard's hand shot out to intercept her. "Mother, perhaps don't." "My?" The word was quiet, but it carried such venom that Richard's hand dropped as if burned. Eleanor took Victoria's glass, held it up to the light, studying the champagne as if she could divine its secrets from the pattern of bubbles. Marcus held his breath, Victoria's grip on his arm tightening until he was certain she would leave bruises. The entire room seemed to have frozen, time suspended in that moment before irrevocable action. Eleanor brought the glass to her lips, and then the lights went out. The power outage lasted only 30 seconds, but in those 30 seconds, everything changed. When the emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows throughout the drawing room, Victoria's champagne glass lay shattered on the marble floor, its contents spreading in a golden puddle that caught the dim light like spilled sunlight. Eleanor Ashworth stood in the center of the chaos, her face pale but composed, brushing glass fragments from her emerald dress. The other guests were murmuring in confusion, servants rushing to clean the mess, and someone was calling for candles. But Marcus saw none of it. His attention was fixed on Victoria, who had gone completely white and was swaying on her feet as if she might faint. "Just a small accident," Eleanor announced to the room, her voice carrying its usual authority. "These old houses and their electrical systems. Richard, perhaps you should take Victoria upstairs. She seems rather overwhelmed." I'm fine," Victoria said quickly, though her voice was barely above a whisper. She looked down at the broken glass, then up at Eleanor, and Marcus saw something pass between them, an understanding, a confirmation of suspicions that made Victoria's breath come in short, sharp gasps. "You're clearly not fine," Richard said, moving to Victoria's side with what might have appeared to be concern to anyone not watching closely. But Marcus was watching very closely, and he saw the grip Richard took on Victoria's elbow, just tight enough to control her movement without appearing aggressive. "Actually," Marcus interjected, stepping closer to Victoria's other side, "I think some fresh air would do us all good. The terrace, perhaps." "I don't think that's necessary," Richard replied, his polite mask slipping just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "Victoria needs to rest. These social events can be quite taxing." The word carried weight, implication. Marcus felt Victoria's entire body tense beside him, saw her free hand press against her stomach as if she were genuinely ill. Around them, the other guests were being efficiently managed by the household staff, offered alternative entertainment in other rooms while the mess was cleaned up. The perfect cover for a private conversation. "Richard's right," Eleanor said, approaching them with measured steps. "Victoria, darling, you look positively green. Perhaps some of those lovely pills Dr. Fairfax prescribed for your nerves." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible only to Marcus, but it told him everything. He'd heard that name before. Dr. Fairfax had been in the news recently, something about a pharmaceutical research scandal, allegations of off-label prescriptions for controlling behavioral issues in wealthy families, problem children, and inconvenient spouses. "I don't think Victoria needs any medication," Marcus said carefully. "What she needs is to make her own choices about her own well-being." The silence that followed his words was charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the recent power outage. Eleanor's eyes narrowed to slits. Richard's jaw clenched visibly, and Victoria looked between them all like a cornered animal calculating escape routes. "Mr. Chen," Eleanor said finally, "I'm beginning to think you've overstayed your welcome." "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "I think he's exactly where he needs to be." Everyone turned to see a woman in her 40s entering the drawing room, her dark hair pulled back severely, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the elegant gowns around her. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, and her eyes held the calculating intelligence Marcus associated with investigative journalists or particularly sharp detectives. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, extending her hand first to Victoria, then to Marcus. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I believe we need to have a conversation. All of us." Richard stepped forward, his protective instincts now openly aggressive. "I'm sorry, but this is a private family celebration. I don't believe you were invited." "Actually, I was," Dr. Mitchell replied calmly, "by Victoria, about 3 weeks ago, when she came to my clinic asking very specific questions about drug interactions and toxicity levels." The bottom fell out of Marcus's world. He turned to stare at Victoria, who had gone beyond pale to a greyish colour that suggested she might actually be sick. But her eyes were alert, focused, and when she met his gaze, he saw not the frightened girl of moments before, but a woman who had been planning something very carefully for a very long time. "Victoria," Richard's voice carried a warning that was no longer even attempting to be subtle. "What is this woman talking about?" "I think," Dr. Mitchell continued, "that Victoria is talking about the fact that someone has been slowly poisoning her over the past 6 months, and that tonight was supposed to be the culmination of that process." Eleanor laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "What an absolutely ridiculous accusation. Dr. Mitchell, is it? I'm not familiar with your credentials, but I assume you're some sort of therapist, here to discuss Victoria's ongoing struggles with anxiety and paranoia?" "Actually, I'm a forensic toxicologist," Dr. Mitchell replied, and Victoria came to me because she'd been experiencing symptoms consistent with chronic heavy metal poisoning, hair loss, memory issues, digestive problems, mood swings that were being conveniently attributed to pre-wedding stress. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. "Victoria, is this true?" She nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "It started about 2 months after the engagement was announced. Little things at first. I'd feel sick after family dinners, tired after spending time at Richard's house. I thought it was just nerves. Or maybe I was developing food allergies. But then," Dr. Mitchell continued, "Victoria started paying attention to patterns. She felt worse after certain meals, after drinks served by specific people, after visits to the Ashworth family physician." "This is insane," Richard said, but Marcus noticed he was backing toward the door. "Mother, we don't have to listen to these paranoid delusions." "Actually, you do," Dr. Mitchell said, pulling a small digital recorder from her purse, "because Victoria has been documenting everything, every symptom, every suspicious drink, every convenient explanation offered for her declining health, and because she had the intelligence to save samples." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Samples of what? Hair clippings, fingernail samples, and copies of her blood work that Dr. Fairfax thought he was hiding. Dr. Mitchell's smile was sharp as a blade. "Did you know that mercury poisoning has a very distinctive signature, especially when it's administered in small, regular doses designed to simulate a gradual nervous breakdown?" Marcus stared at Victoria, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The glass, the champagne glass that was warm, someone had been holding it, adding something to it. "Tonight was supposed to be the final dose," Victoria said, her voice stronger now that the truth was out, enough to cause a complete psychological break. "Richard would play the concerned fiancé, having me committed for my own safety, and in a private facility, owned by the Ashworth pharmaceutical empire, with Dr. Fairfax overseeing my treatment." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus could see the whole horrific plan now. Victoria would disappear into the medical system, her inconvenient questions and growing awareness labeled as mental illness, her considerable inheritance eventually finding its way into Ashworth hands through medical power of attorney and carefully managed legal proceedings. "You're all completely insane," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction now. He was looking at his mother with something that might have been horror or might have been anger at being discovered. "The beautiful thing about mercury poisoning," Dr. Mitchell continued relentlessly, "is that it's almost impossible to detect unless you're specifically looking for it, and the symptoms mimic so many other conditions: anxiety, depression, paranoia, cognitive decline, perfect for someone who wants to discredit a person slowly, make them appear unstable." Eleanor finally spoke, her voice like winter frost. "These are serious accusations, Dr. Mitchell. I hope you have more than paranoid fantasies to support them." "I have lab results," Dr. Mitchell replied. "I have documented medical evidence. I have recorded conversations from Victoria's phone when she started paying attention to what people were saying when they thought she was too impaired to understand. And I have a sworn statement from a certain server who was paid to tamper with drinks at this very party." Marcus remembered the nervous young woman who had served him the warm champagne glass, how quickly she had moved away, how her hands had been shaking. She was in on it. "She was being blackmailed," Victoria said quietly. "Richard found out she was working illegally, threatened to have her deported unless she helped. But when she realized what they were actually doing to me," Victoria's voice broke, "she came forward 3 days ago." The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the tension in the room. Richard's head snapped up, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine fear in his eyes. "You called the police," Richard said to Victoria. "It wasn't a question. I called the police, the medical board, and a journalist friend from university who specializes in pharmaceutical industry corruption." Victoria straightened, and Marcus saw the woman she had always been underneath the fear, strong, intelligent, and absolutely done with being anyone's victim. Did you really think I'd let you kill me without a fight? Eleanor moved faster than Marcus would have thought possible for a woman her age, lunging toward Victoria with her hands outstretched like claws. But Marcus was faster, catching the older woman's wrists and holding her back as she snarled with pure animalistic rage. "You stupid little girl," Eleanor hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Ashworth name, our business, everything we've built. Built on what?" Victoria shot back, her voice ringing with years of suppressed fury. "How many other women have you done this to? How many other inconvenient people have disappeared into your private medical facilities?" The sirens were getting closer now, and Marcus could see blue lights flashing through the rain-streaked windows. Around them, the house had gone quiet, the other party guests apparently evacuated by staff who had undoubtedly dealt with situations like this before. Richard made a break for the terrace doors, but Dr. Mitchell stepped smoothly into his path. "I wouldn't recommend it," she said calmly. "There are officers positioned around the entire property. Victoria was very thorough in her planning." 3 weeks, Marcus said, understanding dawning. "That's why you invited me tonight. You knew this was, going to happen." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. "I needed someone here who would question things, who would notice details, who wouldn't be dismissed as easily as I would be. Someone who—" She paused, looking directly into his eyes. "Someone who had loved me enough to see through lies." The front door opened with a crash that echoed through the house, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps and authoritative voices. "Police! Nobody move!" As officers flooded into the drawing room, Marcus found himself standing in the center of what looked like the aftermath of an explosion. Broken glass, spilled champagne, Eleanor Ashworth being restrained while screaming about family honor, Richard being read his rights, and Victoria collapsing into a chair as the adrenaline finally left her system. "Miss Blackwood?" A detective approached Victoria with professional concern. "I'm Detective Inspector Walsh. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I need to give you my statement," Victoria said firmly. "Everything, all of it. And I have evidence, boxes of evidence, stored in 3 separate locations." Marcus sat down beside her, taking her hand as she had taken his arm earlier. Her skin was cold, but her pulse was strong and steady. "Victoria, why didn't you tell me? When you invited me, why didn't you explain?" She looked at him with eyes that held a decade of regret. "Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, and because I was afraid that if I told you, they'd try to hurt you too." She squeezed his hand. "I've spent the last 6 months realizing that breaking up with you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I wasn't going to let them take away my chance to make it right." Detective Inspector Walsh was consulting with Dr. Mitchell, comparing notes and evidence bags. The house swarmed with crime scene technicians, and Marcus could hear Richard being questioned in another room, his voice rising in protest and denial. "The server," Victoria said suddenly. "Maria Santos, the woman who was serving the drinks. Please make sure she's protected. They threatened her family." "We have Ms. Santos in protective custody," Detective Walsh assured her. "She's been very cooperative. Her testimony, combined with Dr. Mitchell's findings and your documentation, gives us a very strong case." Eleanor Ashworth was led past them in handcuffs, her silver hair disheveled for the first time in Marcus's memory, her expensive dress rumpled and stained. She stopped directly in front of Victoria, her eyes burning with undiminished hatred. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "The Ashworths have resources you can't imagine. Connections, power. The Ashworths," Victoria replied with calm certainty, "are about to discover that attempted murder tends to make even the most powerful connections rather nervous about maintaining their associations." Eleanor was led away, and the drawing room fell into relative quiet. Dr. Mitchell was packing up her equipment, Detective Walsh was coordinating with his team, and Marcus found himself alone with Victoria for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "I need to ask you something," he said carefully, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Victoria nodded, bracing herself. How long have you known about the poisoning, about their plan? How long have you been aware of what was happening?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "I started suspecting about 8 weeks ago, but I've known something was wrong almost from the beginning. Richard was different when we were alone together, controlling in ways that seemed loving at first, but gradually became frightening. And Eleanor," Victoria shuddered. "She had this way of talking about Richard's first wife, the one who died in that car accident. She'd make these comments about how tragic it was that some people just couldn't handle the pressures of their position in society." Marcus felt ice forming in his chest. His first wife, Catherine Morrison. She married Richard 4 years ago and died 18 months later. Single car accident on a rainy night. Drove straight off a cliff. But before she died, she'd been exhibiting signs of increasing mental instability, depression, paranoia, claims that someone was trying to hurt her. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Jesus Christ, Victoria. How many? I don't know," she said quietly. "But I intend to find out. This isn't just about what they tried to do to me, Marcus. This is about what they may have been doing for years, to anyone who got in their way or threatened their interests." Detective Walsh approached them again, his notebook ready. "Miss Blackwood, I need to go through everything from the beginning. Every detail you can remember about when the symptoms started, who had access to your food and drinks, any conversations you overheard or suspicious behavior you noticed." "Of course," Victoria stood up, steady now despite everything she'd been through. "But first, I want to make something clear. I know how these families work, Detective Walsh. I know how much influence they have, how many people owe them favors. The Ashworths will try to make this go away, to discredit me and Dr. Mitchell and anyone else who comes forward." "Miss Blackwood," Detective Walsh said seriously, "attempted murder is attempted murder, regardless of how wealthy or connected the perpetrators are. We have physical evidence, multiple witnesses, documented medical findings, and what appears to be a clear pattern of premeditation. This isn't going away." Victoria nodded, but Marcus could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. She'd lived in this world long enough to know how justice could be bought and sold, how inconvenient truths could be buried under avalanches of expensive lawyers and strategic donations. "There's something else," she said suddenly. "Dr. Fairfax, he's been prescribing medications to other women in our social circle. Women whose husbands or families wanted them to be more manageable. I have names, dates, medication, lists. It's not just the Ashworths, it's a whole network." The room went completely silent. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her packing, Detective Walsh stopped writing, and Marcus felt the magnitude of what Victoria was describing wash over him like a tide. "How many women are we talking about?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "At least 12 that I know of," Victoria replied. "Probably more. Wives who became difficult after discovering affairs or questioning financial decisions. Daughters who refused. Arranged marriages or wanted to pursue careers their families disapproved of. Even a few elderly women whose wills needed adjusting." Detective Walsh was writing furiously now. "Miss Blackwood, you're describing what sounds like a systematic conspiracy spanning multiple families and potentially dozens of victims." "I'm describing," Victoria said with steel in her voice, "exactly what this world has always been. Rich people solving their problems by making inconvenient people disappear. The only difference is that now they have sophisticated drugs and private medical facilities instead of just convenient accidents and mysterious illnesses." Marcus stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the storm that was finally beginning to clear. Police cars lined the street, their lights painting the rain-soaked pavement in alternating blue and red. In the distance, he could see news vans arriving. Victoria's journalist friend had apparently moved quickly on the story. "Victoria," he said without turning around, "what happens now? To you, I mean, after all this?" She joined him at the window, and he saw her reflection in the glass. Exhausted but determined, frightened but no longer broken. "Now I testify. I help build cases against everyone involved, and I try to figure out how to live with the fact that I was almost murdered by people I trusted, people I was planning to call family. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the controlled chaos outside. Then Victoria spoke again, her voice so quiet Marcus almost missed it. And I hope that somewhere in all of this, I can find a way back to the person I was before I got so scared of living honestly that I almost let them kill me for it. Marcus turned to face her fully, seeing in her eyes the woman he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago, but also someone entirely new, someone forged by survival, strengthened by the decision to fight back. 3 days after the arrests, Marcus found himself sitting in a cramped office in Scotland Yard, watching Detective Inspector Walsh spread crime scene photos across a table like tarot cards predicting a very dark future. The images showed the Ashworth mansion from every angle. The drawing room where it had all unfolded, the kitchen where mercury-laced compounds had been prepared, and most disturbing of all, a basement laboratory that had been discovered behind a false wall in Richard's private study. We found enough equipment down there to run a small pharmaceutical operation, Detective Walsh was saying, his voice grim. Industrial scales, chemical storage units, even a centrifuge. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment poisoning scheme. This was a sophisticated long-term operation. Victoria sat across from Marcus, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her despite the strength she'd shown 3 nights ago. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. The blood tests Dr. Mitchell had ordered showed mercury levels that should have been fatal. The fact that Victoria was alive and coherent was, according to the doctors, something approaching. Miraculous. How long would it have taken? Victoria asked quietly. If I hadn't figured it out, how long before? Based on the dosage patterns we've reconstructed from your hair samples and the equipment in the lab, Dr. Mitchell replied, consulting her notes. You had perhaps 2 weeks left before permanent neurological damage, maybe a month before complete organ failure. The words hung in the air like a death sentence narrowly avoided. Marcus reached across the table and took Victoria's, and feeling how cold her skin was despite the warm office. But you did figure it out, he said firmly. You fought back, you survived, and now we're going to make sure they pay for what they did. Detective Walsh nodded. Speaking of which, we need to discuss the other cases. Miss Blackwood, you mentioned 12 women who might have been targeted. We're going to need names, details, anything you can remember about their symptoms or circumstances. Victoria straightened in her chair, the fragile victim disappearing as she transformed back into the determined survivor. I've been making lists. Catherine Morrison, Richard's first wife, is obviously our starting point. But there's also Jennifer Pemberton, who died of a stroke at 32 after threatening to expose her husband's money laundering. Sarah Whitmore, who was institutionalized for severe depression just before her father's will was read. Margaret Thornfield— Wait, Marcus interrupted, a chill running down his spine. Margaret Thornfield, the pharmaceutical heiress who died last year. The same one. She was planning to blow the whistle on off-label drug testing being done in private facilities, suddenly developed early-onset dementia, and died within 6 months. Victoria's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the rage burning in her eyes. Her death cleared the way for her business partner to take control of her research patents. Dr. Mitchell looked up from her notes. That business partner wouldn't happen to be connected to the Ashworth pharmaceutical empire, would it? Eleanor Ashworth was Margaret's godmother and the executor of her estate, Victoria confirmed. She had power of attorney for Margaret's medical decisions in the final months. The silence that followed was broken only by the scratch of Detective Walsh's pen as he added names to what was clearly becoming a very long list. Marcus felt sick as the scope of what they were uncovering became clear. This wasn't just about Victoria or even about a few inconvenient wives. This was about a systematic elimination of anyone who threatened the power structure that kept certain families at the top of British society. There's more, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found something in Richard's study the night before the party. Financial records showing payments to Dr. Fairfax dating back 7 years, and correspondence with private medical facilities in Switzerland, Scotland, even the Caribbean, places where wealthy families send troubled relatives for specialized treatment." Detective Walsh leaned forward. "What kind of payments are we talking about?" "Hundreds of thousands of pounds, sometimes millions, depending on the complexity of the case." Victoria pulled a manila folder from her bag, setting it on the table like evidence of original sin. "I photographed everything I could. Before I had to leave, Richard was becoming suspicious about how much time I was spending in his study." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the documents Victoria had risked everything to obtain. Bank transfers, medical consultation fees, payments to facilities with names like Serenity Hills Recovery Center and Alpine Wellness Institute. But it was the correspondence that made his blood run cold. Clinical discussions of dosages, timelines for behavioral modification, and prognoses for subjects who were never identified by name, only by number and family affiliation. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, looking at a memo dated 6 months ago. "This one is about you, Victoria. Subject 23A, showing increased resistance to standard protocols. Recommend escalation to final phase within 30 days of social event." Victoria's face went white. The engagement party. They were planning to finish me off that night no matter what. If the mercury hadn't worked fast enough, they had backup. And plans. Dr. Mitchell was studying the medical documents with the focused intensity of someone trained to read between the lines of scientific jargon. These protocols, they're not just about mercury poisoning. They're using combinations of psychiatric medications, heavy metals, even some experimental compounds I don't recognize. And the facilities they're sending people to. She trailed off, but Marcus could see the horrified understanding in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "These aren't treatment centers," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "They're elimination sites, places where people go to disappear permanently, but slowly enough that it looks like natural progression of illness or mental breakdown." The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him as the true magnitude of what Victoria had escaped became clear. This wasn't just attempted murder. It was genocide, a systematic elimination of anyone who threatened the established order. "How many people are we talking about?" Detective Walsh asked. "Total, across all these facilities and all these years?" Victoria was flipping through more documents, her hands steadier now as she focused on the task of documentation rather than the emotions it evoked. "Based on these records, at least 47 people over the past 7 years, but I think that's just the ones the Ashworths were directly involved with. If other families have similar operations..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus was thinking about all the mysterious deaths and disappearances he'd heard about over the years. Wealthy family members who had suddenly developed rare illnesses, promising young people who had died in suspicious accidents, whistleblowers who had suffered convenient mental breakdowns just before important testimony. A knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. A young constable entered, carrying a box of evidence bags and looking thoroughly shaken. "Sir," the constable said to Detective Walsh, "we've finished processing the Ashworth house. You're going to want to see what we found in Mrs. Ashworth's private safe." The constable set the box on the table and began removing items with the careful precision of someone handling unexploded ordnance. The first was a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with Eleanor's precise handwriting. The second was a collection of photographs, surveillance photos of various people, including several of Victoria taken over the past months without her knowledge. But it was the third item that made Victoria gasp audibly. A small glass vial containing a clear liquid, labeled in Eleanor's handwriting, "Final solution, VB, emergency use only." "What is it?" Marcus asked, though he was afraid he already knew. Dr. Mitchell examined the vial carefully, not opening it but studying the liquid through the glass. "If I had to guess, based on the concentration and clarity, this is probably a massive dose of whatever they were using to poison Victoria. Enough to cause immediate cardiac arrest, designed to look like a heart attack brought on by stress. Emergency use only," Victoria repeated, her voice hollow. "They had a backup plan. If I had started talking, started asking too many questions, started getting too close to the truth." She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus could see the scenario playing out in his mind. Victoria found dead in her apartment, apparently the victim of wedding stress and underlying health issues that had been carefully documented over months of slow poisoning. Detective Walsh was studying the ledger with growing amazement. "Miss Blackwood, this book contains detailed records of every operation they've conducted since 2017. Names, dates, methods, outcomes. It's like a murder diary." "Eleanor always was obsessive about record keeping," Victoria said with bitter irony. "She used to brag about how organized she was, how she never forgot a detail. I suppose that included details about killing people." Marcus was looking at the surveillance photos of Victoria. Images of her leaving her apartment, entering restaurants, talking on her phone in public places. Someone had been watching her constantly, documenting her movements, her habits, her routine. The level of planning and preparation was terrifying in its thoroughness. "There's something else," the constable said, pulling out a final evidence bag. "We found this hidden in a hollowed-out book in Mrs. Ashworth's library." The bag contained a USB drive and a small notebook. Detective Walsh connected the drive to his laptop, and within moments the screen was filled with video files organized by date and location. "Security footage," he murmured, clicking on one of the files. "From inside the Ashworth house, but also from other locations. Looks like they've been recording their activities." The video that opened showed the interior of what appeared to be a medical facility. Sterile white walls, hospital equipment, and a patient lying unconscious on a bed. The timestamp showed it was recorded 8 months ago, and Marcus felt sick as he recognized the patient's face from newspaper obituaries. "That's Jennifer Pemberton," Victoria whispered. "She's supposed to have died of a stroke at home." They watched in horrified silence as the video showed medical personnel, if they could be called that, administering injections, monitoring vital signs, and eventually disconnecting life support. The entire process was documented with clinical precision, including close-up shots of the patient's face as she died. "Turn it off," Victoria said suddenly, her voice breaking. "Please, I can't watch anymore." Detective Walsh closed the video file, but not before Marcus saw. There were dozens more, organized by victim name and facility location. The Ashworths hadn't just been killing people, they'd been recording their deaths, keeping trophies of their crimes. "Why would they document this?" Marcus asked. "Why keep evidence that could destroy them?" "Insurance," Dr. Mitchell said grimly. "Video evidence of other families' involvement in murders. If anyone tried to expose them, they could bring down half the British aristocracy with them." Victoria stood up suddenly, pacing to the window and staring out at the grey London sky. "They thought they were untouchable," she said. "They thought their power, their connections, their money made them immune to consequences. And for 7 years, they were right." Marcus joined her at the window, noting how she flinched slightly when he approached, a new wariness that broke his heart. "But they weren't right in the end. You stopped them." "I stopped them from killing me," Victoria corrected. "But all those other people, Jennifer, Margaret, Catherine, dozens of others, they're still dead, and their families still don't know the truth about what happened to them." Detective Walsh cleared his throat. "Actually, Miss Blackwood, that's something we need to discuss. The Crown Prosecution Service wants to know if you're prepared to testify in what's likely to be the most high-profile murder trial in British legal history. Because based on what we've found, we're not just prosecuting the Ashworths. We're looking at conspiracy charges involving multiple prominent families, medical professionals, and possibly government officials." Victoria turned from the window, and Marcus saw something in her expression that reminded him of why he'd fallen in love with her all those years ago. A fierce determination to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. "I'll testify," she said firmly, "against all of them. Every family, every doctor, every official who knew what was happening, and did nothing to stop it." "Victoria," Marcus said gently, "you understand what that means. These people still have enormous resources, powerful friends. They'll try to destroy your credibility, your reputation, maybe even try to kill me again?" Victoria smiled grimly. "Let them try. I'm not the frightened girl who agreed to marry Richard Ashworth. I'm not the victim they tried to create with their poison and their manipulation. And I'm sure as hell not going to let them escape justice, because I'm afraid of what they might do to me." Dr. Mitchell closed her laptop and began packing up her files. "I'll support your testimony with all the medical evidence we've gathered, and I'll reach out to my colleagues in forensic pathology. We need to petition for exhumations on some of these previous natural deaths." "How many families are we talking about?" Detective Walsh asked, consulting his growing list of names and connections. Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking. The Ashworths were the center of it, but they had partnerships with at least 6 other major families that I know of: the Pembertons, the Whitmore Estate, the Thornfield Pharmaceutical Company, Lord Berkshire's investment group, the Morrison Shipping Empire, and... She paused, her face going pale. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "The Blackwoods," Victoria whispered. "My own family. My father's been receiving payments from the Ashworth Pharmaceutical Division for the past 3 years. Large payments with no clear business justification." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You think your own family?" "I think my father knew exactly what kind of man Richard Ashworth was when he encouraged me to accept his proposal," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I think he knew what would happen to me, and he decided my life was an acceptable price to pay for whatever business arrangement they had." The room fell silent except for the sound of Victoria's quiet crying. Not the desperate sobs of a victim, but the grief of someone mourning the death of every illusion she'd ever held about the people she'd trusted. Marcus moved to her side, and this time she didn't flinch when he put his arms around her. She leaned into him, and he felt the full weight of what she'd been carrying, not just the fear of being murdered, but the knowledge that everyone she'd ever trusted had been willing to let it happen. "We're going to need protection for Miss Blackwood," Detective Walsh said quietly. "Safe house, new identity if necessary. The moment word of this investigation gets out, and it will, she's going to become the most targeted witness in the country." "No," Victoria said firmly, pulling away from Marcus and wiping her eyes. "No safe houses, no hiding. These people have been operating in shadows for years, counting on their victims being too afraid or too discredited to speak out. I'm not going to validate their power by running away." "Victoria, be reasonable," Marcus said. "These people have killed dozens of people and made it look natural. What makes me think I can survive?" Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Because I've already survived the worst they could do to me. They had me in their house, under their control, with access to my food and drink for months. They had the perfect murder weapon, the perfect cover story, and the perfect victim. And I'm still here." She stood up, and Marcus saw in her posture the woman who had successfully planned and executed one of the most sophisticated exposures of criminal conspiracy in British history. "Besides," Victoria continued, "I have something they never expected me to have." "What's that?" Detective Walsh asked. Victoria's smile widened, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus saw genuine happiness in her eyes. "I have help. Real help, from people who actually care whether I live or die." She looked directly at Marcus. "And I have hope that maybe, just maybe, I can build something real and honest out of the wreckage they tried to make of my life." Outside, the London sky was beginning to clear, weak sunlight breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Marcus thought about the choice Victoria was making, to stand and fight rather than hide, to trust in justice rather than accept the corruption that had nearly killed her. It was, he realized, exactly the choice he would have expected from the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had been buried under years of fear and social conditioning, but who had never actually died. The woman who was finally, truly free. 6 months after the arrests, the Old Bailey had never seen anything like the trial of Regina versus Ashworth et al. The courthouse was surrounded by barriers and armed police, while inside, the largest courtroom in the building had been specially configured to accommodate the 43 defendants, their armies of legal representation, and the unprecedented media attention focused on what newspapers were calling the aristocracy murders. Marcus sat in the public gallery, watching Victoria take the witness stand for her 3rd day of testimony. She wore a simple navy dress and had pulled her auburn hair back, severely, presenting herself as a credible witness rather than a society figure. But it was her voice that had changed the most. Clear, steady, unflinching as she detailed month after month of systematic poisoning and psychological manipulation. "Miss Blackwood," the prosecution barrister continued, "can you tell the court about the conversation you overheard between Mrs. Eleanor Ashworth and Dr. Fairfax on March 15th of this year?" Victoria consulted her notes. She had documentation for everything, a paper trail of survival that had taken investigators months to fully comprehend. "I was in the library of the Ashworth house, waiting for Richard to finish a business call. Mrs. Ashworth and Dr. Fairfax were in the adjoining study, and they didn't realize I could hear them through the connecting door. And what did you hear? Dr. Fairfax was expressing concern about my blood work. He said the mercury levels were approaching dangerous thresholds and that they might need to slow the dosing schedule." Victoria's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her notes. Mrs. Ashworth told him that slowing down wasn't an option. She said, and I quote, "The girl is starting to ask questions about Catherine's death. We need to finish this before she connects the pieces." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Catherine Morrison, Richard's first wife, had become the linchpin of the prosecution's case, her death now revealed as the template for Victoria's planned murder. "What was your reaction to overhearing this conversation?" "Terror," Victoria said simply, "because I realized they weren't just trying to make me sick, they were trying to kill me, and I realized that Catherine had been murdered, just as they were planning to murder me." In the defendant's dock, Eleanor Ashworth sat rigid as carved marble, her silver hair perfectly styled even in prison clothes, her eyes fixed on Victoria with undimmed hatred, as if she could will her star witness into silence through sheer force of malevolence. Beside her, Richard stared at his hands, the golden boy of British society now revealed as a serial killer who had used charm and privilege as weapons. The prosecution had been building their case methodically for months, and the evidence was overwhelming. Exhumations of previous victims had revealed mercury poisoning, digitalis overdoses, and other sophisticated murder methods. The private medical facilities had been raided, revealing chambers that belonged in horror films rather than healing institutions. And the digital evidence, those horrific videos, had provided irrefutable proof of systematic murder. But it was Victoria's testimony that tied everything together. Her meticulous documentation of her own near murder providing the roadmap. Investigators needed to understand how the entire conspiracy had operated. "Miss Blackwood," the defense barrister began his cross-examination, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension that Marcus wanted to strangle. "Isn't it true that you've struggled with mental health issues throughout your adult life?" Victoria had been prepared for this line of attack. "I've been in therapy, yes, for anxiety and depression related to childhood trauma and later relationship issues, none of which affected my ability to observe and document what was being done to me. But you admit you were taking prescription medications for these conditions?" "Yes." medications that were prescribed by Dr. Fairfax, who we now know was part of the conspiracy to poison me. Victoria's voice carried an edge of steel. Are you suggesting that seeking help for depression somehow made me unable to recognize when someone was trying to murder me? The defense attorney shifted tactics. Miss Blackwood, isn't it true that you stood to inherit a considerable fortune upon your marriage to Mr. Ashworth? No, that's false. Under the prenuptial agreement that Richard insisted upon, I would have received a modest settlement in the event of divorce, and nothing if I died during the marriage. Victoria looked directly at the jury. My inheritance from my own family, however, would have passed to my husband upon my death. That's nearly £12 million that Richard stood to gain by killing me. Marcus watched the jury's faces as this information sank in. These weren't naive people. They understood greed, even if they'd never encountered it on this scale. But the defense wasn't finished. Miss Blackwood, you've testified about feeling paranoid and frightened in the months leading up to your allegations against the defendants. Isn't it possible that these feelings influenced your interpretation of innocent events? Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Marcus held his breath. This was the crucial question, the one that could determine whether the jury saw her as a credible witness or a paranoid victim of her own mental illness. Sir, Victoria said finally, I was being slowly poisoned with mercury. Dr. Mitchell's testimony established that the levels in my system were nearly fatal. Paranoia is a documented symptom of mercury poisoning. So yes, I was paranoid, but I was paranoid because someone was actually trying to kill me. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge had to call for order. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching Victoria hold her ground against lawyers who were being paid obscene amounts to discredit her testimony. But the defense had one more arrow in their quiver. Miss Blackwood, isn't it true that you renewed a romantic relationship with Marcus Chen in the weeks following these alleged events? A man you'd been in love with for over a decade? Marcus felt his stomach drop. They were going to paint Victoria as a woman who had fabricated an elaborate murder conspiracy to escape her engagement and return to an old love. I did reconnect with Marcus after the truth came out, Victoria said calmly. But I invited him to the engagement party before I revealed what was happening to me. I needed someone there who would notice details, who wouldn't be easily dismissed or discredited, someone with the intelligence to see through lies, or someone who would support your version of events because of his feelings for you. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger for the first time since taking the stand. Marcus had no idea what was really happening that night. If he was there to support any version of events, it was Richard's version. He came to my engagement party expecting to make polite conversation and congratulate me on my upcoming marriage. But you've testified that you planned the entire exposure. The recording device, Dr. Mitchell's presence, even the police response. You orchestrated everything, didn't you? Yes, I did. Victoria's voice rang with pride rather than shame. Because I realized that no one was going to save me unless I saved myself. These people had killed dozens of others and made it look natural. They had resources, connections, power that I couldn't match. So I had to be smarter than they were. And you don't see how that level of elaborate planning might suggest a mind that's capable of fabricating evidence. Victoria stood up in the witness box, her composure finally cracking, not with hysteria, but with righteous fury. I didn't fabricate the mercury in my blood, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. I didn't fabricate the laboratory in Richard's basement. I didn't fabricate the videos of them murdering other people. I didn't fabricate the financial records showing payments for assassination services. And I sure as hell didn't fabricate the vial of poison with my initials on it that they planned to use if their slow-acting method didn't work fast enough. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Eleanor Ashworth's mask had slipped slightly, and Marcus could see the fear creeping into her eyes as she realized the jury was believing every word Victoria said. No more questions, the defense attorney said quietly. The prosecutor stood for redirect examination. Miss Blackwood, in your opinion, Why did the defendants target you specifically? Victoria took a deep breath, composing herself. Because I started asking questions about Catherine Morrison's death, because I noticed inconsistencies in their stories about her final months, and because, she paused, looking directly at Eleanor Ashworth, because I was inconveniently intelligent for someone they were planning to murder. Can you elaborate on that? They'd perfected their system on women who were isolated, who didn't have strong support networks, who could be easily discredited if they started talking about feeling sick or suspicious. But I had friends in medicine. I had resources to get independent testing done, and I had enough education to research my symptoms and recognize patterns. Victoria's voice grew stronger. I was supposed to be a victim, but I turned out to be a detective instead. When Victoria finally stepped down from the witness stand, Marcus could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. She'd been testifying for 3 days, reliving months of terror and manipulation under the scrutiny of the world's media and the most expensive defense lawyers money could buy. But she'd done it. She'd told the truth, completely and convincingly, and now it was up to the jury to decide whether justice would be served. The trial continued for another 2 weeks as the prosecution presented evidence against the other defendants. Family members, doctors, facility administrators, and government officials who had enabled or participated in the conspiracy. The scope of the operation was staggering. At least 63 murders over 7 years, victims ranging from inconvenient spouses to whistleblowing employees to family members who threatened to expose financial crime. Each day, Marcus watched Victoria sitting in the gallery, taking notes and occasionally consulting with the prosecution team. She'd thrown herself into the pursuit of justice with the same meticulous planning that had saved her life, helping investigators understand the social dynamics and family connections that had made the conspiracy possible. On the final day of testimony, Dr. Mitchell took the stand to present the medical evidence one more time. The toxicology reports, the video analysis, the examination of bodies that had been exhumed from what their families thought were natural graves. Her testimony was clinical, precise, and utterly damning. In my professional opinion, Dr. Mitchell concluded, we're looking at the most sophisticated and extensive murder conspiracy in modern British history. The defendants didn't just kill people, they perfected the art of undetectable murder and then industrialized it. The defense's closing arguments were predictably desperate. They painted Victoria as a disturbed woman who had fabricated an elaborate fantasy to escape an unwanted marriage. They suggested that the deaths were coincidental, that the medical evidence was contaminated, that the videos were somehow doctored. But the prosecution's closing was devastating in its simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the lead prosecutor said, standing before them with quiet authority, Victoria Blackwood is alive today because she was smarter, braver, and more resourceful than her would-be murderers expected. 63 other people were not so fortunate. He gestured toward the evidence tables, covered with photographs, documents, and medical reports. The defendants want you to believe that this is all coincidence, all misunderstanding, all the product of one woman's imagination. But the evidence doesn't lie. The bodies don't lie. The mercury levels don't lie. The videos of murder don't lie. The prosecutor walked closer to the jury box. Victoria Blackwood survived to tell this story, and in telling it, she's given voice to 63 people who can no longer speak for themselves. The question you must answer is simple. Will you believe the evidence, or will you let wealth and privilege escape justice one more time? The jury deliberated for 18 hours across 3 days. When they returned, the foreman stood with the gravity of someone delivering a verdict that would reshape British society. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the case of Catherine Morrison, guilty. And the charge of attempted murder in the first degree in the case of Victoria Blackwood, guilty. The verdicts continued for 43 defendants and over 200 individual charges. By the time it was finished, the Old Bailey had witnessed the complete dismantling of a criminal conspiracy that had operated at the highest levels of British society for nearly a decade. Eleanor Ashworth received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Richard received the same, plus additional sentences for financial crimes and obstruction of justice. Dr. Fairfax was sentenced to 30 years, his medical license permanently revoked. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years, their reputations, fortunes, and families destroyed by their participation in systematic murder. Outside the courthouse, Victoria stood before a bank of microphones and cameras, reading a statement she'd prepared for the dozens of victims who hadn't survived to see justice. Done. Today's verdicts cannot bring back the people who were murdered, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the cold London air. But they can serve as a warning to anyone else who believes that wealth and privilege place them above the law. Murder is murder, regardless of how sophisticated the method or how powerful the perpetrator. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. I want to thank Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Detective Inspector Walsh, and the entire investigation team for their tireless work in bringing these criminals to justice. I want to thank the jury for seeing through expensive lies to find the truth. And I want to promise the families of all the victims that this fight isn't over. I'm Miss Blackwood, a reporter called out. What's next for you? How do you move forward after something like this? Victoria smiled, a real smile, the first Marcus had seen since this nightmare began. I'm going to live, she said simply, honestly, openly, and without fear. It's what they tried to take from me, and it's what I refuse to let them steal from anyone else. Oh, as the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself standing beside Victoria on the courthouse steps, watching the defendants being led away in handcuffs. Eleanor Ashworth passed close enough for them to hear her speaking to her lawyer, her voice still carrying that familiar arrogance. This isn't over, she was saying. We have appeals, we have connections, You have nothing, Victoria called out, her voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. Eleanor stopped and turned, her eyes blazing with undiminished hatred. You think you've won something, girl. You think destroying my family changes what you are. You're nobody. You'll always be nobody. Victoria walked down the steps until she was standing directly in front of the woman who had tried to murder her, close enough to speak without raising her voice. You're right, Victoria said quietly. I am nobody. I'm not wealthy enough to buy justice, not connected enough to escape consequences, not powerful enough to make inconvenient people disappear. She smiled. I'm just someone who refused to die quietly, and apparently that was enough. Eleanor was led away without another word, and Marcus found himself alone with Victoria for the first time since the night that had changed everything. So, he said, offering her his arm as they walked down the courthouse steps together. What now? Victoria considered the question seriously. Now, I figure out how to be the person I was before I got so scared of living honestly, and I do whatever I can to make sure this never happens to anyone else. They walked in comfortable silence through the London streets, past the news vans and police barriers, toward whatever came next. The city around them felt different somehow, cleaner, as if a poison had been drawn out of its veins. Victoria, Marcus said as they reached the corner where their paths would diverge, there's something I need to ask you. She stopped, turning to face him with those green eyes that had first captivated him 10 years ago and that still made his heart race, even after everything they'd been through. That night at the engagement party, when you invited me, was any part of it real? Your feelings, I mean. Or was I just a useful witness to your plan? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus braced himself for an answer that might break his heart all over again. The plan was real, she said finally. I did invite you because I needed someone who would notice details, someone who couldn't be easily dismissed. But Marcus, she reached up and touched his face gently. The reason I chose you wasn't just because you're observant or credible. It was because, even after 10 years, even after I'd hurt you and pushed you away and chosen safety over love, you were still the person I trusted most in the world. She stepped closer, and Marcus could smell her perfume. Not the expensive French fragrance she'd worn as Richard's fiancée, but something simpler, more like the girl he'd fallen in love with in university. I invited you because I knew that if I died that night, I wanted the last face I saw to be someone who had actually loved me. And if I survived, she smiled, and for the first time in months it reached her eyes. If I survived, I wanted to finally tell you the truth about why I really broke up with you. Which was, because I was a coward, Victoria said simply. Because I was so afraid of not being good enough for you, so terrified of disappointing you the way I'd disappointed everyone else, that I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. She laughed softly, but there were tears in her eyes. It took almost being murdered to realize that disappointing someone you love is still better than spending your life with someone who wants you dead. Marcus felt something that had been knotted tight in his chest for 10 years finally begin to loosen. Victoria, I know we can't just pick up where we left off, she continued quickly. I know I have healing to do and trust to rebuild, and probably years of therapy ahead of me. And I know you have every right to tell me it's too late, that too much has happened, that you've moved on. Marcus stepped closer, until they were standing so close he could count the freckles across her nose, could see the faint scar on her chin from a childhood accident she'd told him about years ago. I have one more question, he said softly. What's that? Are you asking me to wait for you to heal, or are you asking me to help you heal? Victoria's smile broke across her face like sunrise. I'm asking you to build something new with me, something honest and real and strong enough to survive whatever comes next. She paused, then added with a trace of her old mischief, assuming you're interested in dating a woman whose idea of small talk includes stories about surviving murder conspiracies. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. Victoria Blackwood, I've been in love with you for 10 years, tentar novamente bicontinua editar, through a breakup that nearly destroyed me, through watching you get engaged to someone else, and through discovering that someone else was trying to kill you. A few murder conspiracy stories aren't going to scare me off now. He took her hands in his, noting how much stronger they felt than they had 6 months ago. Besides, I've always preferred my relationships with a bit of excitement. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying across the London street like music. Just promise me one thing, she said. Anything. Promise me that from now on, we'll always drink from our own glasses. Marcus pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him, solid and real and alive, despite everything that had tried to destroy her. Victoria, I promise you that from now on, we'll never have to worry about what's in our glasses, because we're going to be the ones pouring them. They stood there on the corner, holding each other, as the sun broke through London's perpetual clouds for the first time in what felt like years. Around them, the city continued its ancient rhythm, buses rumbling past, pedestrians hurrying to appointments, the distant sound of Big Ben marking another hour in the endless progression of time. But for Marcus and Victoria, this moment felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Not a return to what they'd once had, but the creation of something stronger, forged in truth and tempered by survival. 6 months later, Marcus found himself in a place he'd never expected to be, standing in the garden of a small house in the Cotswolds, watching Victoria plant roses in soil that belonged to them both. The house was nothing like the grand estate where she'd grown up, or the mansion where she'd nearly died. It was small, cozy, and most importantly, it was theirs. Victoria had used her inheritance, what remained after legal fees and donations to victim advocacy groups, to buy this place where they could start fresh. No servants, no family histories, no poisoned chalices masquerading as champagne flutes. Just 2 people learning to build a life based on honesty rather than convenience. "The white roses are coming along nicely," Victoria said, standing and brushing dirt from her knees. She wore simple jeans and a cotton shirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked younger than she had in years, the lines of constant vigilance finally beginning to fade from around her eyes. "Dr. Mitchell says roses are good for the soul," Marcus replied, looking up from the architectural plans he'd been reviewing. He was designing a memorial garden for the victims of the Ashworth conspiracy, a place where their families could come to remember people who had been denied proper mourning by the lies surrounding their deaths. Victoria walked over to him, automatically positioning herself so she could see the garden gate. Old habits from months of hypervigilance died hard, but she no longer flinched when Marcus moved suddenly or checked her drinks for signs of tampering. The healing was slow, but real. "Any word from Detective Walsh?" she asked, settling beside him on the garden bench they'd bought at a local antique shop. The appeals were denied. All of them. Eleanor and Richard will spend the rest of their lives in prison, and the others aren't eligible for parole for at least 15 years. Marcus set down the plans and took her hand. "It's really over, Victoria. They can't hurt anyone else." Victoria nodded, but Marcus could see the shadow that still crossed her face when she thought about the families who hadn't been as fortunate as she was. The memorial garden wasn't just about remembrance, it was about ensuring that the victims weren't forgotten once the media attention faded. "I got a letter today," she said quietly, "from Catherine Morrison's mother. She wanted to thank me for giving her daughter a voice." Marcus squeezed her hand. "That means something." "It does. But it also reminds me how many voices were silenced before I found mine." Victoria looked out across their modest garden, where they grew their own vegetables and herbs, partly for the pleasure of it, partly because old habits of self-protection were hard to break. "You can't save everyone," Marcus said gently. "You can only save the people you can save and inspire others to do the same." It was a conversation they'd had many times during Victoria's recovery. The guilt of survival, the weight of being the one who lived to tell the story, the responsibility she felt to honor those who hadn't been as lucky or as clever or as stubborn as she had been. "Dr. Martinez says I'm making progress," Victoria said, referring to the therapist she'd been seeing twice a week since the trial ended. "She thinks I might be ready to cut back to weekly sessions." "How do you feel about that?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. For the first time in my life, I'm healing from something instead of just surviving it." Their phone rang from inside the house, and Victoria automatically tensed. Even now, unexpected calls could trigger anxiety attacks, but Marcus had learned to recognize the signs and respond with calm reassurance rather than panic. "I'll get it," he said, kissing her forehead. "Probably just the contractor calling about the memorial garden timeline." But when he returned a few minutes later, his expression was serious enough to make Victoria stand up immediately. "What is it?" she asked. "That was Detective Walsh. They found something at one of the private medical facilities in Switzerland. Something that suggests the conspiracy was even larger than we thought." Victoria's face went pale, but her voice was steady. "How much larger?" "International. Connections to similar operations in France, Germany, possibly the United States. Families using the same methods to eliminate inconvenient people across multiple countries. They stood in their peaceful garden, surrounded by roses and herbs and the simple life they'd built together, contemplating the possibility that their nightmare was far from over. "They want me to testify again," Marcus continued. "International tribunal, multiple jurisdictions. It could take years." Victoria was quiet for a long time, and Marcus watched the internal battle play out across her features. The part of her that wanted to stay hidden, stay safe, stay in their garden where no one could hurt her, and the part of her that couldn't let other people suffer what she'd suffered, couldn't let murderers escape justice just because they operated across national borders. Finally, she spoke. "How many more victims are we talking about?" "Walsh estimates at least 200, possibly more. The Swiss facility alone had records going back 15 years. Victoria closed her eyes, and Marcus could see her processing the weight of that number. 200 people who had died thinking they were sick, who had been murdered by people they trusted, whose families still believed they had died natural deaths. When she opened her eyes, Marcus saw the same determination that had saved her life 6 months ago. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Victoria, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, final. "Those people died because monsters like the Ashworths thought they were untouchable. If there are more monsters using the same methods, then they need to know that someone will stand up to them." Marcus pulled her close, feeling the strength in her small frame, the steel that had been forged in the crucible of her near-death experience. "Are you sure? You've already done more than anyone could ask." Victoria looked around their garden one more time, at the roses they'd planted, the vegetables they'd grown, the simple life they'd built together based on truth and trust and love. Then she looked at Marcus with eyes that held no trace of the frightened girl who had once chosen safety over honesty. "Marcus, for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. I'm someone who survived when I was supposed to die, who fought back when I was supposed to submit, who chose truth when lies would have been easier." She smiled, and it was fierce and beautiful and absolutely fearless. "I'm not going to waste that by hiding in our garden while other people are being murdered." 3 weeks later, they stood together in the courthouse in Geneva, preparing for testimony that would expose an international network of murder that had operated for decades. Victoria wore another simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, her notes organized with the same meticulous care that had saved her life. But this time, Marcus wasn't sitting in the gallery watching her testify alone. This time, he was beside her at the witness table, adding his architect's eye for detail to her survivor's knowledge of how the conspiracy had operated. "Miss Blackwood, Mr. Chen," the international prosecutor began, "thank you for traveling here to share your testimony. I know this isn't easy." Victoria looked out at the defendants, representatives of wealthy families from 6 different countries, all linked by their willingness to murder inconvenient people. Some of the faces were familiar from London social circles. Others were strangers who shared the same cold calculation in their eyes. "Actually," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "it's the easiest thing I've ever done, because this time I'm not fighting alone." She reached for Marcus's hand under the table, feeling his steady warmth, his unwavering support. Around them, the machinery of international justice prepared to confront evil that had hidden behind wealth and privilege for far too long. And Victoria Blackwood, survivor, witness, and living proof that truth was stronger than poison, prepared to give voice to hundreds of victims who could no longer speak for themselves. The reckoning had only just begun.